So, is symphonic metal a subgenre of progressive rock, or are they more like cousins? How much do they really have in common? All right, well, I don't have the answers to those questions, but I do have some thoughts about the second solo album by Marko Hietala of Nightwish and Northern Kings, which dabbles a bit in both genres, and a handful of others as well. My review of Roses of the Deep, coming right up. Hey there, Prog Noggins. I'm Dave, and welcome to Bleeding Edge. Thank you for joining me. All right, so this time around, I'm talking about Roses from the Deep, which is the second solo album by Marko Hietala. Now, if you're not familiar with the name immediately, he's that revered Finnish bassist and vocalist who's best known for his work with Nightwish, Northern Kings, and Taro. He's gotten around a bit, and if you know symphonic metal, you probably know who I'm talking about. Now, on this album, he is joined by Thomas Wainola. I am certain I have mispronounced that. I will try again and see if I can get it a little bit closer. Thomas Wainola, guitar and synths. He also did the production for this album. And also Anssi Nikkanen on drums. Also, there's some guest vocals in there by Tarja Turunen, who, again, if you know Nightwish, you know exactly who I'm talking about, and you knew her by the first name. I didn't even need to say the second name, although it was there, so I said it. So we got an album that runs about 10 songs long, not about, exactly 10 songs long, about 53 minutes, and it's got a lot of variety to it. It ranges from heavy rockers to extended proggy pieces, to some crunchy post-grunge, and there's even a nice little ballad in there. There's no overarching theme or story, so there's nothing conceptual about this album that would pull it more into the progressive rock category or progressive metal. And, honestly, conceptual storytelling is not uncommon in symphonic metal either. So it's got a little bit of that in there, but only song to song. It's not an overall thing for the album. So in that sense, no, it doesn't come across as very proggy in that way. But before we dive in and get into the specifics, just a quick reminder, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with my weekly reviews, reactions when I get to them, and occasional interviews. I'm not totally done those, but they're going to be a little more sparse. As always, we'll be scoring the album in 4 categories: intellectual, innovation, technical, also known as progginess, and emotional. And hey, if it seems needed, I'll toss in an enjoyment modifier in there. We'll get to that in a little bit. So we start off with the intellectual. So honestly, best way I often describe a lot of symphonic metal is it lies somewhere in the Venn diagram of audacity and cheese. And I say that with all due love. I love a lot of symphonic metal out there, whether it be Nightwish or Within Temptation or Leaves' Eyes, things like that. There is a tendency, admittedly, for it to be a little cheesy, and I'm not ashamed to say that I enjoy some of that cheese. I can dig somebody singing about Nemo or doing a rendition of Andrew Lloyd Webber music. That goes with the territory, and I'm cool with that. And again, I say it with all affection. The lead-off track, though, tries a little hard, and I think falls in that latter category a little bit hard, which kind of throws me off. Admittedly, if it'd been just to the lead-off track for me to decide whether to listen to this album in whole or not, I might not have gotten there. I'm going to be perfectly honest. It does a great job, I think, of trying to paint a picture straight from Universal's classic Monsters. And it's nice, but I don't know. Maybe it just tries a little hard for my taste. But the rest of the album really is also highly creative. And I think that's a word I use a lot when I was putting my thoughts together, my notes together for this review. There's a lot of great use of metaphor and poetic imagery and just varied themes and subjects and topics. And really, it's just very, very original. Like looking through the lyrics that Marko writes, you're just not coming across things that are cliche or tired old tropes or anything. he really clearly put a lot of effort into writing very original lyrics in every way he could, and really came across with just a great deal of intellectual effort put into it. And I frankly found it quite impressive, really. You rarely see that. Even some of the best artists from time to time are going to pull out an old cliche or a stock phrase, or they're going to rely on something that's been said or rephrase somebody else's lyric. You're not finding that in this here, and it's very cool. And maybe while it's not getting into deep philosophy, there is certainly some social commentary buried within, and some pretty cool Easter eggs within Rebel of the North. You might be able to guess what those Easter eggs might relate to based on that title, depending on what kind of TV you watch. But the best example of this is The Dragon Must Die, which is a fantasy-tinged progressive piece, full-on proggy, full-on fantasy theme, at least in terms of the title and some of the images presented, all camouflaging a criticism of modern consumerism and corporate greed. That's a pretty cool achievement right there. I dug that. This is really overall a very well thought out album and full of originality, interesting turns of phrase, great use of metaphor. Is it top notch? Probably not. Is it the upper echelon? No, but it earns its solid 4 all over. Absolutely. So really nicely done in terms of the intellectual feel of the album, despite the lack of an overall progressive style concept. So looking now at innovation. Now, that's a little bit of a tough one for me because I think a lot of it depends on expectations coming into this. Marko being known for work with symphonic type metal bands, deeply rooted in that Scandinavian tradition that we all know if you've been listening to that kind of music. And this to me feels like him stretching his legs a little bit, stretching his boundaries. Like there's nothing here that I would say to my ear revolutionizes hard rock or symphonic metal. I know he describes it as hard rock, so I don't think he was going for a symphonic feel. But there's a lot of nicely varied styles and textures. Each song has its own individual personality and its own direction. And I really think that variety in many ways can help the album, but it certainly helps each song stand out from the others very nicely. It's very easy to remember which ones I liked best and which ones I didn't like as well, without having to go back and re-listen to them necessarily. I don't know what his first album sounded like, his first solo album. I know this is his first one since officially departing from Nightwish. So I think a lot of it comes down to, especially for longtime fans, how much you are open to him going outside the boundaries of symphonic rock, how much you expected that from him. I admittedly have not kept up with the last couple of Nightwish albums. Maybe they foreshadowed this kind of output from him, and I missed that, which would be a shame, because there's some really cool stuff on this. But I think he, in my sense, really is expanding his own personal musical palette in a lot of different directions. Certainly it's outside the boundaries of what I was expecting. And there's a wide range of influences and styles that are on exhibit here. That can also, at the same time, while making the album very varied, I can't get a better word at the moment, it also contributes a little bit to it being somewhat uneven, which we'll get back to that in a little bit. He's not bringing something that I would say was exceptionally new to the prog world. Certainly, I don't think this is something that he's bringing new to symphonic metal or symphonic rock or even folk metal. But I do get the impression this is him stretching beyond his normal range. And certainly he brings a lot of variety and originality to that effort. In that sense, I think in the microcosm that is Marko Hietala, I'm scoring this one a 4 as well. Moving on to technical, also known as progginess, basically. The arrangements on display here are not what I would call especially complex. The compositions aren't especially, as I like to say, precious, as sometimes can be heard on a lot of progressive albums. They are tastefully restrained, and what is done with them is in service to the song, in service to the moment in the song. Yes, there are some symphonic elements that are to be expected with an album of this pedigree that are added in when necessary, but there's a lot of varied techniques and texture styles and song styles, basically. There's a lot of influences on display throughout this album, and they give each song its own personality, which I like. And when the moment suits and there needs to be some emphasis, when things need to get a little bit more full-blown, shall we say, it's done. But it's done with restraint. Even when it comes down to solos, they range anywhere from modest and brief to really pretty impressive. They're usually memorable, but they never overshadow the song in which they are contained, which I think is a nice thing. Sometimes, again, with progressive rock and metal, you get issues where things get a little carried away, get a little overblown, and that's not what you will find here. Everything is done with restraint and is in service to the emotion and the needs of the song at any given moment. And that's really very cool. There's only a couple of examples where they are extended. And those would be, I think, at least one of them definitely was as a song is going into its end, is fading out, basically. But again, there's a wide range of styles and approaches on display and techniques used within the songs that really help highlight certain aspects of the songs and gives each one of them their own flavor. And you got everything from the outright prog of The Dragon Must Die, probably my favorite track on the album, to hard rockers like Rebel of the North and Impatient Zero, to Left on Mars, which for me features a riff very reminiscent of Saga, all the way to a full-on symphonic piece sung in Finnish. That was Tamakula, I think it is. I didn't put that in my little script there to remember in my notes, but I took a shot at it. Again, I am probably mangling the Finnish language whenever I try things like that. But again, it's all over, and it's very tasteful, and it's very professionally done. And at the same time, I think not something that I would call notably impressive on a level that one normally associates with progressive rock and metal. So I don't mean to detract from it. And as I'd like to say, I maybe almost could have switched this category with Innovation. They could have been interchangeable almost in scores. But on this one, at least, I'm going to rate it a 3. Meanwhile, the emotional component of it. Well, all right. I got to say, I came away from this one more intrigued, more surprised and interested than what one would call, emotionally affected or emotionally impacted. It was cool to hear Marko defying my personal expectations coming into this, but I can't say that was necessarily enough to connect with me emotionally. There's nothing I would say that got me excited or got my heart pumping. A little bit here and there. Impatient Zero is a real nice, almost post-grunge kind of rocker that does it nicely. And certainly the title track is a very nice ballad that I think brings a great deal of emotional content to it. And particularly, probably the finest vocal performance on the album, I think, by Marko. Just a lovely little ballad, and really the song that attracted me to checking out the album, as it was featured on Prog Magazine's Tracks of the Week. So they drew my attention to it, and I thought, all right, I want to check out. I want to hear the rest of this because I'm very intrigued. So that album, or that song rather, is really one of the other standouts for me. It's almost got a cinematic feel to it. Really, it's I kind of said it almost should be, playing over the final credits scroll of the last episode of Outlander when it comes out in the next year or so. It's got that big romantic Heathcliff running across the moors vibe to it, which I really dug, admittedly. I seem to be getting drawn to the softer songs and the ballads more this year so far. I have no idea why that is, other than it's just a bit of a coincidence. But, while the album as a whole didn't necessarily connect with me massively on an emotional level, it certainly it didn't move me, but it certainly didn't hurt it. So I middle of the road on this as well. It's pretty much a score I've been giving a lot for the emotional part of things, but I'm giving this one a 3. So you take those 4 scores, you add them all up, you divide, simple math, you get a raw score of 3.5. However, as is often the case, when you just look at things as objectively as possible, the raw score doesn't necessarily really fully tell the story for me personally. For a lot of you that like Marko and like his work with those other bands we mentioned, this may hit the spot for you perfectly. It didn't quite for me. Honestly, there is, as I mentioned, there's a lot to like in this album. There's a lot that's really quite impressive. At the same time, for me, when the album hit lows, they were, for me, kind of off-putting and a bit low. The highs were really nice and high. The lows really detracted from the album for me. There's no question that Marko is a dedicated artist and craftsman to what he does with his music. He brings a great deal of creativity, both lyrically and musically, to this project. And while he throws a lot of stuff at the wall, honestly, for me, probably less than half of that pasta stuck. What did stick, again, was really good. The Dragon Must Die, Roses from the Deep, Impatient Zero are the highlights. A lot of the rest of the album did not do it for me. I got to be perfectly honest. And that lack of consistency, I think, overall hurts the album for me in terms of my enjoyment, despite the overall very, very high quality on display. So for that, I'm going to apply an enjoyment modifier of -0.5, which I think makes about sense. Half the album I'll go back to, and the other half I probably never will. So that gives us a final overall score of 3. It's a good, solid score, to be perfectly honest. And depending on who you are and what your expectations would have been for Marko or what your just general taste is, you may feel that 3.5 is the best reflector of how good this album is. And my final enjoyment modifier just kind of screws things up. And that's fine. We've all got opinions, right? A couple quick notes on it. As I mentioned, the lyrics are really, really creative, and it's very cool. I think the one thing that sometimes hurt things a little bit, I know Marko is known long-term for his vocal work on Nightwish, probably more as a backing vocalist or whatever, or a complementary vocalist than the primary vocalist. But I'm not always sure that his voice, as good as he is a singer, I'm not sure his voice itself was always up to the heft and the drama of it all. You know, there's a lot of heaviness that comes with all this. There's a lot of grandiosity that comes with it. And I can't say to my ear his voice is the strongest, despite the fact that he's obviously a very good singer. I think in my head, I would want something with a little more punch to it, a little more power behind it. And it doesn't always work as well from song to song, particularly though, if something like the title track, it's perfectly suited. And again, that's his best vocal performance on the album, I think. And he does a great job of a duet with Tarja on Left on Mars, which I think is reflective of their past work together. So that only makes sense. But overall, again, like the rest of the album for me, it's a lot of up and down. So I can't say I know how longtime fans will react to this one. It's definitely not what I would call classic Nightwish, for good or bad, depending on the listener, depending on what you want. Those without expectations coming into this album might be the ones quickest to enjoy it. I don't want to knock Frankenstein's Wife too hard, but if that's the first track you listen to, don't stop there. Because honestly, I think for me, I think the album only gets better from that point on. Skip it if you want to. There's a lot of great songs on the album. That to me is just not, it might be the weakest link. I have to be perfectly honest, despite the fact that I think a great job was done trying to bring the imagery of classic universal monsters to the song, but it is what it is. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm curious what yours are. What did you think coming into it? What did you expect before the album came out? Does this match what your expectations were? And how did matching or not matching your expectations end up impacting your ability to like it or not? I'm very curious to know what the Nightwish fans and the Northern Kings fans and the Tarot fans might have to say about this, because it's not like Marko has an extensive body of solo work to look at. So that's it for now. Leave your comments, leave your thoughts, leave your suggestions if you have other albums out there coming out soon that you'd like me to review, or even an old album to go back and review. I do plan to maybe get into some retro reviews later on this year. We'll see how it goes. The new albums coming out are keeping me busy as it is. That's all I have for you at this time. So, as always, I remind you, never fear to deviate from the norm. And until next time, keep it proggy.